name is Mike Minatoli. I am a member of the career education and coaching team here at Yale SOM. And very excited to talk to you today about resume strategies that work. Resumes sometimes seem like a very basic topic, but can mean a lot. But we also don't want to over rely on a resume in some cases. I will always lean, and I'll talk a couple of minutes about leaning toward networking. If we're not networking with people and finding the right people to provide our resume to, then we're doing a lot of our work on our resume that will never be seen. But today we hope to focus a little bit on creating a compelling resume that showcases our skills and hopefully lands us our dream job. And we're going to present some key strategies to kind of help you hopefully stand out from the competition. That's a question we get a lot here. How can I stand out as a unique candidate? How can I show that I am a specific candidate for this, which is great. And a lot of times we hear, I've finally gotten my resume just the way I want it, but I'm still not getting interviews. So we want to talk a little bit about that. If that does sound like you, you're not alone. In this session, we'll try to address some of the common resume myths and offer some specific and actionable guidance to help you put your best foot forward. But again, I want to go back to that piece about networking. If we're not doing the networking piece and we are simply taking an approach of what many will call spray and pray with our resume, there's a good chance a lot of people won't see it. There's too many automated systems. There's too many resumes. It is too easy to apply to jobs these days to just upload or click apply on LinkedIn. We need to use that networking piece to then present this document that shows our great experience at the end of the day. And I think as we think about resumes, we want to think about what are we presenting, right? Each reader of a resume sees different things. I will typically say, if a student asks me or an alum asks me what I look for, I'm typically looking at maybe just the highlight stuff, education, where did they go to school, what was their degree, maybe companies, the titles that they had. And I love looking at the additional section, that soft skills type thing. What are they volunteering at? What are their interests? What can we talk about to build a rapport that is maybe separate from that experience that we have? A more technical hiring manager or recruiter might be looking specifically for those hard skills, those certifications, what degrees you've gotten, what are those technical skills that you would bring to this very technical role? And then a hiring manager or executive recruiter looking for senior leaders, maybe looking more at the scope of leadership someone has provided. Do they have access to senior leaders, partners, high-level clients? What type of business development, what type of profit were they bringing into the organization? So everybody kind of has their own lens. There's no one way to write a resume. We want to try and capture as much as we can and get it all in. But let's jump in. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of your resume. We'll take a little quiz on resume true and false. We'll talk a little bit about what content should I be using, what and how should I be presenting that. We'll talk a little bit about format. Should I template or not? And then hopefully we'll have a little time at the end. Happy to answer any questions that may come up. So as I said earlier, I still think networking is the #1 entryway into identifying opportunities and ensuring that a reader is actually seeing your resume. We spend a lot of time working on our resumes and reworking our resumes, but if we're not doing that other part, who or what is actually reading it? And the other cautionary tale I'll throw out to you with resume is a lot of people, it's one of those areas where I feel like you could ask 10 people to take a look at your resume and get 10 very different pieces of feedback about what it shows, how you're reflecting information, what format you're using, what style. It is one of those areas where it's great to get all that feedback and take some advice. But at the end of the day, this is your document. It is a representation of you and what you hope to get across to a reader, to an employer, to a connection. And so it's good to take all that advice and then parse out the pieces that you think are most important to you or that make sense to you. If you continually take advice from different people from showing it to them, you could find yourself in a position where you've made all these changes and then you're back to the original after 4 or 5 people because you kind of went in a circular way here. The one time I'll say that might be different is if you are having a conversation with someone who is part of a hiring process or has some influence and they say, I think you should do this on your resume, then you should do that on your resume, at least for that company or for that particular role or even for that particular person. So just a couple things to kind of think about as you think about your resume, having it reviewed, jumping into what is there, and thinking about how you want to present yourself. Again, it is your document. It is a representation of you, and so it should speak to you and for you. All right, so let's dive into some of these basic reasons that your resume could be important. The importance of a well-crafted resume. And I think the number one thing that you can see from this slide is that it has the opportunity to open up doors. Sending large numbers of the same resume out to a myriad of opportunities may feel like the right way to go. But if you don't attract a reader's attention quickly and hold it, you're likely not to get that call for whatever that next step might be. Maybe it is a coffee chat, maybe it is an informational interview, maybe it is a job interview, maybe it's just getting in front of the right person. So a couple things I would say. One, the first impression is certainly a key to this, right? It is the first impression that a potential contact or an employer has of you, whether you are applying to a role through an applicant system, applying to a role through a connection that you've made, or making that initial outreach to set up an informational to learn more about a role. This is the first impression that someone potentially has of you. And so we want to make sure that that is a good one. It is key. And we want to think broadly about what we're included, right? So I was just thinking about some examples of things that stood out to me that were maybe things that you wouldn't think about, right? Like we're often thinking about the schools we went to, we're thinking about, I did this on this project, I had this title. But I would say, recently I had a conversation with someone, I reviewed their resume, didn't meet them in person. And then a couple of weeks later, we were talking in person, and they mentioned a piece on their resume that was that they could juggle a soccer ball 4,000 times consecutively. And I actually I just reacted like, "Oh, you're the juggler." I knew exactly who this person was based on it. I remembered all the facts about their resume then because of that little additional piece that they had included on their resume. So sometimes it's not those those things that we think are directly related that stand out. It is sometimes those other opportunities that are under interest, volunteer activities that do stand out, things that you did while you were at Yale SOM during your time here. Another example I would use in that's kind of similar is years ago, I had worked with a student who was in the military and was a sniper, and we all know what snipers in the military do. But at the bottom of their resume, they had a note about raising chickens. And this student had continually come back to me and said, no one ever asks me about my work experience. They only ask me about raising chickens. And they had built, strong rapport with a lot of the folks that they had spoken to over time. That the rest of the resume, I don't want to say it was irrelevant, but they were spending more time. Half the interview was talking about raising chickens, and what people were pulling out from that was that this person was loyal, that this person was very detailed, that they could dive into a project, that they cared. And there were so many other intrinsic values that came out of the conversation about this person raising chickens that the other pieces were important because we know what we could potentially get out of someone who was in the military. We know what their experience could have been. We see their education, but maybe I get a different view of who the person is because of that little interest section. So think about the first impression that you're making. We'll get to other pieces of the first impression in a moment here. But as we said, it is an opportunity to open up doors to new opportunities that maybe you didn't know about, right? Sometimes I see a resume. Just recently, someone that I worked with years ago sent a resume and said, oh, I saw this job open at Yale. Would you be willing to pass my resume on? And we had a conversation, and I looked at their resume. We hadn't been connected in about 10 years. And I had seen that they had done some work that was different than what they were doing in the moment, and was able to say to them, you know what, there's actually 2 other jobs open at Yale that you probably, that ultimately the person missed or wasn't thinking about, that were based on previous experiences and exposures that they had that I brought up that they ultimately applied and interviewed for. But information that was an update about a position that they wouldn't have otherwise known about. So the opportunity that your resume puts an idea in front of someone, again, maybe it's the education piece, maybe it is a connection to a common school, maybe it is a common former employer. And again, there's what comes out of that, right? When we speak about, if we use, if we use PwC as an example, like a larger company that really trains their employees really well, you kind of know what you're going to get from a person who has worked in an organization like that. You know how they've been trained, you know what type of work they've done, you probably get a good sense of what they could do. If I look at someone's resume and it has a lot of entrepreneurial experience, right? Like I know that they've probably had their hands in a lot of different things. I don't necessarily need to read the bullets to get that sense. I get there on my own as I scan the resume. So think about the opportunities that your resume could be to open up different doors that you didn't really realize were open based on what you are including. And then I would say the other side is that the last point here is that it reflects your professionalism, right? There are a lot of resumes that we see out there that aren't well crafted, that don't look real nice, and sometimes say that the person is very detail oriented, and then you find mistakes or different levels of formatting. We want to make our resume as perfect as we can, right? What does it look like to the eye visually? How does a mistake reflect on a resume? A very simple one I had years ago that, again, I even remember, this is probably 10 years ago, was someone had written that they worked in a fast-paced environment. And instead of writing PACED for fast-paced, they wrote PASTE, which of course is glue or some solvent that creates a connection. And again, minor thing, but for the roles that you are probably looking at, we're talking razor thin opportunities to make sure that we are the candidate that stands out, and we want to stand out for the right reason. So make sure that your resume is also reflecting your professionalism. When you look at it, what do you get? If you've hired folks, have been part of hiring opportunities in your own organizations in the past, when you've looked at resumes, what kind of comes to mind in those moments? What stands out to you? Make sure that your resume is reflecting those same things. So let's think about that. The other piece of kind of how important your resume is making the translation for a reader, right? A lot of times as we develop our resume, we think about what we care about, right? And we care about what we've done, where we've done it, maybe what we want to do moving forward, what we're proud of. Maybe it's kind of, again, what we want next, what we need. We really want to focus more on what that organization or what that hiring manager is looking, or what that role needs in terms of, right? Show me how you've solved problems. Show me how you've created or achieved bold outcomes. Show me that you've grown your business. We have to kind of shift our mindset to just thinking about like, oh, these are the things that I've highlighted really well. That's a great starting point, right? I want to highlight these things that I feel really good about and I can highlight, but translating them to reading that job description, seeing what that organization is like, seeing what they need, what is that role demanding, having a coffee chat or an informational interview with someone, asking questions, what's most important to this organization, and then crafting our resume to make sure that our bullets are kind of focusing on those pieces is what is most important here. So this translation of ideas of what we've done can be the most critical part. Employers are looking for a solution to their problem, right? That's why they want to hire people. They don't want to hire anyone. They want to hire someone that can be a problem solver. So you sending kind of a generic resume is just another problem for them, right? It's not the solution they're looking for. Tell them, right? A lot of times I say to folks that I look at their resume, I can assume based on this that you've done, but I want you to show me it, right? So craft your bullets in a way that gives you that advantage to get out of that pile of resumes that's happening. Don't leave it up to them to make that translation, okay? You need to do that work. You need to highlight your skills and experience in language that makes sense for them to, from their perspective, in their context of what the current business environment is, okay? Now, I am not a proponent of having multiple resumes out there, but a couple tips I would say. One, it is good to have a very plain and basic version that you can use to apply to roles where there are applicant tracking systems, right? If you have a fancy resume and you put it into an applicant tracking system, those sometimes have hard time reading those. So you might want to have a very basic version of your resume that you are uploading into those systems. And then you could always have that kind of fancier, maybe it's a more creative version. Maybe it has some different highlights that you want to show, or nowadays I see a lot of more senior folks with like a bar down the side that shows leadership skills or some highlights of their career. All great things. I would probably use that very basic version to apply. And then if I'm lucky enough to connect with someone or get an interview, bring that other version, maybe print it out or send an email to the person with that other more visually appealing version is a way to go. Another piece of translation that I would kind of think about is like I keep a working version of my resume that goes back 20 years now with everything I've ever done. It's probably 4 or 5 pages long. And it's there just to remember and remind me what I had done 15, 20 years ago in some cases. Sometimes we look back, we had a really good resume 5 years ago that really focused on that position that I was most recently in. But now over time, I need to add this new position that I'm in. So I've taken some work away from my previous position. And maybe then we're only doing the highlights there. But maybe in that time frame of a couple of jobs ago, there was a 6-week period where I worked on a project that exactly relates to the role that I'm applying to now, if I can go back to this kind of all-encompassing version of my resume to be able to kind of pull out those bullets that I was highlighting at an earlier time, that helps me. But also, I want to make the point too that make sure that you don't forget that when we highlight things on a resume, that especially as we try to relate them specifically to a role, it doesn't have to be something that we did over a 2-year period of our job that was 3 years long. It could be something that was 6-week project. It could be something that was only a year of the 5 years that we were there. Highlight those things, especially as they relate. And one way to kind of remember what those things are is to have this kind of working version as you go on. So just a couple of tips there on kind of how to make that translation. And the other thing to think about is how can we take advantage of the opportunity to use industry-specific language that could change the view of your reader, right? Some of this we learn, again, if I go back to networking, we learn the language, we do our research, we kind of figure out what's out there, and maybe I adjust some of my language. Maybe this organization uses customer instead of client. Maybe one word is better than the other in this case. Sometimes if you are a military veteran, maybe you had a title that is, would in the civilian world would be project manager, but it had a very government-like, so we can put that title next to it to give someone a different idea of what we were doing. Maybe you worked at a startup where titles didn't matter, and now you have the opportunity to pinpoint a title. But do think about those things. And that is, again, information that we'll get from research and conversation, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then the other thing that I would think about for those of you that are more global job seekers at the moment, language can matter in times, right? You want to sound like the person. So one example that we had here in terms of defining, if we want to use an example, defining turnover. Sometimes in the US, as we talk about turnover, we're thinking about people. If I was in the UK, I might be thinking about revenue in that case. So as you are applying to different roles in different countries, if that's something you're looking at, be very mindful of the language and the connotation of the words that you're using to ensure that that is a piece that is being recognized. But again, translation, tell them what they need to hear and show them that you are the candidate rather than just kind of telling them what you think is most important. Let's dive into some true and false here. A couple of questions that I'll throw out. Nobody needs to answer. I will answer them for you. And here we go. So resume, true or false? A reader will take the time to understand and interpret what we've done in other jobs, companies, industries, and how that experience sets you up for success in their company. I'm going to go no. All right. I'm going to say that this is probably false. Right? If you read research at this point, there is research that shows that recruiters or a resume reader are using anywhere between 6 to 30 seconds to read your resume. They're scanning. They're looking for highlights. Like I was saying earlier, I highlight education. I highlight some companies and roles. I highlight the additional. I get to a point where I find the folks that I want to dive deeper and where I'm reading bullets. But most times it's that initial scan that someone is getting through. So we want to, again, make sure that we are putting forward our best experience. And I think a question just came in about single page, multiple page things. I think we want to look at it. And I have a tip later. And basically the going, again, research says that 1 page for every 10 years of work experience that you have. I could get into that. I've been working for 20 years. I have a 1-page resume. I could very easily get it to a 2-page resume, but more often than not, I want to highlight the most recent experiences that I've had. So I drop off some of the more, the longer resources and jobs that I've had in favor of really diving into the work that I've done most recently as I've progressed in my career. Other people like to include more. They like to include speaking engagements, things that, written documents that they've created. If you've authored, certainly okay. I would say if you go to multiple pages, I always am a proponent of if you're going to a second or third, I get iffy on the third page, but second page, you should be able to fill the full page. It shouldn't be a quarter of the page. It shouldn't be a half page. So if you're going multiple pages, just my own kind of sense is you should try to fill both pages if you can. Otherwise, we might want to look at that information and kind of figure what's relevant and what can we maybe cut. I think the worst thing you could do is kind of have a 2-page resume where we're only using 3 or 4 lines on that second side. So just a couple things to kind of mention in terms of how we're looking at this. Let's move on. All right, second question. If we include everything we've ever done, the interviewer will take the time to pick and choose the things that are important to them. I'm going to probably go false again here. right? If there's a lot of information there, no one is reading that, that second page of bullets that are there. It's going to be a harder thing for someone to digest. So again, if we want to really highlight, one page is a great way to go. We can highlight the things that are important. We can even employ a strategy that I said earlier, where you have a one pager that you apply to. And if you connect with someone, if you're going for an informational, if you're sitting down to that job, like I have done this in the past where I have a printed larger version, the longer version, the two pager that I will bring to an interview with me and say, oh, I know you probably have the version that I applied with. Here's another version that shows a little bit more extensive background on what I've done. So that is a different way to kind of approach those different pieces if you want to look at that. But a shorter, more concise resume really highlights what's important, both from your viewpoint of what I can be concise about and really highlight, and from the reader's version of what do I truly want to look at, right? You look at some of these things, like I looked at a position the other day, and it was on LinkedIn, but still within 3 hours, I think it had gone to 113 applicants in 3 hours, right? And I'm sure that there's an applicant tracking system in the back of that that's picking out certain candidates. But if in 3 hours we got to 113, we probably got pretty high over the first week. If I'm now, say I picked the best 50 that I thought about, and I'm looking at 50 resumes, like, is someone going to read all of this work that I've put into a two-pager, or are they going to look at the highlights of what's going on there? So do think about that as you move forward. All right, another true and false. It is important to capture the reader's attention quickly and keep it by sharing relevant evidence of your prior experience and success through resonant stories and language. And obviously this is true. It's exactly what we've been talking about here. It's tough to say, especially the higher we go. Obviously, we have more work experience that we want to reflect back on and show and connect. But the higher we go, we're probably writing executive summary. So this is a way for you to really suss out what is important. And if I'm just listing all these jobs that I've done, 20 years ago, how significant of an impact did I make in that organization 20 years ago? Now, again, if that job 20 years ago is setting up something now and shows a progression of promotion or shows a progression of knowledge, okay, we can talk about including those things. But more often than not, I would say, 10, 15 years is probably as far back as we want to go. But again, up for debate. It's your document. You need to show what you think you want to get out there. Focused brevity is valued in business and actually can be seen as a demonstrated skill. So we want to show that we're a fit for that role, and we have maybe 1 page to do that, maybe 2 pages to do that. Anything more, I think we're just throwing a lot of information and hoping that the person's going to read it. All right, well, let's shift a little bit to job descriptions here because most of our resume should be attached to a job description and adjusted to a job description. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we move forward here. But so true or false, everything on a job description is required and non-negotiable. This is very false. A lot of times there are things in job postings that have nothing to do with a specific role, and that candidates think they need to meet all of the requirements, and that is certainly untrue. I would say, based on experience, it's not always required. Consider why they might be asking for a specific experience. What do they suppose people with that experiences are able to do? I also think that sometimes there are companies that put out job postings just to fish, right? Like, if we can get a couple candidates that do this and a couple candidates that do this, that'd be great. And we'll decide which we think is more important as we go through interviews and meet the people. Maybe we'll find somebody who has all of these things, but definitely consider, and you can see this little note on here that I threw out. I saw this a couple times as I was doing some research on this, but research shows that when men apply to jobs, they meet an average of 60% of the criteria and move forward with that. Women and other marginalized people tend to only apply when they meet 100% of the job qualification. So interesting way to be thinking about this. And I would say, I am a believer that even especially if you're coming out of a school like this, a program like this, and you've had a significant career of leadership, effectiveness, raising funds, meeting profit, we can probably make a pivot to a lot of things that don't necessarily go specific to every job posting, right? Our transferable skills, which we'll talk about in a moment, can be something that we can highlight in those cases. And then job description, true or false? Job descriptions outline all the skills and outcomes important to the role in question. And I thought it was funny because on the role, my role, it says that I plan and execute admissions, financial aid, internship, career services, and student organization programs, that I prepare and submit recommendations to admissions and financial aid. that I develop budgets and loan repayment schedules, and that I am able to lift 15 pounds. I don't think I've lifted 15 pounds in this job at any point. But there are things that end up on job postings that aren't necessarily a part of the job. Maybe the organization has different bands or different roles that need to fit a specific description, and then we add on the specifics of that role. Sometimes, as we'll see on the next slide, the people who are writing them don't know the role real well, so they just include a lot of things. And again, sometimes they are phishing. So we're going to say that this is false. And this is why I would say, as you look at those job descriptions, if there are 3 of 7 things that you relate to and can find some experience to match to, then I would say move forward and figure out a way to match your resume to those 3 to 7, 3 to 6 things, whatever it is. Work to solve those specific challenges and see what's there. And our final last kind of true or false here, job descriptions are always written thoughtfully by people who have done the job and know from experience what it takes to be successful in the role and in the organizational culture. And I would say normally that is not true. So we'll say that that is also false. I would say there are plenty of roles that don't include everything. There are some that include everything, including the kitchen sink. And so again, if we get to a point where we're reading some job postings and maybe I pull out 3 of the 10 bullets and I'm able to look at my resume and match it appropriately to some of those jobs, that's a great starting point. And then we let the other person decide. What we can control on our end is putting together a resume that matches and highlights your experience to those 3 bullets that you have decided are close and connected to your personal experience or your professional goals. And that's what we can control. We can't control what the reader decides to do with that. So if we do see these long job descriptions that kind of don't mean a lot, tailoring is the way to go, which is what we're going to jump into now. I'd be curious just to hear from some of you that maybe have hired in the past, and you can use the chat box to kind of type this in. I'd be curious to just see what we get back. As you've thought about different candidates or seen different resumes for folks that have applied to your jobs, what has made certain candidate resumes or applications stand out to you in the past? Or what you have said yes to. So if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I'll we can talk about them as they come in. But curious what you've heard or seen, and what's been effective. What have you been attracted to in the resumes that you've seen? And we'll come back and revisit that in a little bit here. But as we think about a resume, so we've gotten to a point now, we've thought about that resume, we've thought about the translation of kind of what each organization wants. Now we really want to look at tailoring our resume to each job description that we see. Oh, sorry about that. So yeah, sorry, Brandon, go ahead and throw those into the Q&A. My bad. If you do have questions, you could throw them into the Q&A or in the chat. It is closed right now, so we'll use the Q&A. But going back, tailoring your resume to each job application, think about those things that you maybe are typing in the Q&A at the moment. I'll go and look in a second. Apply those same ideas, those same high standards to your own application, right? Did you tailor this resume to the role in question? Did you provide succinct, relevant bullets that inspire questions about someone wanting to ask you more, that demonstrate your potential in their organization, right? I will sometimes use the analogy of your bullets in your resume are, if we think about fishing, right? Your bullets are the lure. Your bullets are the bait to get someone to talk more, ask you questions about those things so you can dive into these projects that you've worked on. So what do those look like? Are they giving me enough information? Are they showing results? Are we quantifying them as best as we can? And then also there's evidence of how we think about challenges of the roles, what it would be like to work for them based on their communication and preparation, right? If I look at this resume, what am I getting across? Again, that first impression, that first look, that is this professional nature. So diving in here, a couple of tips I would say that we want to dive into. One, when you see roles, research the company and the role specifically, right? Take a look at that job description, maybe circle some words on there that speak like language that organization or that industry might be using. Underline some of the bullets that you think stand out to things that you want to do or things that attract you to this specific role. And then let's take a look at our resume. Again, I'm not a proponent of having all these different versions of resumes, but maybe we're changing a word here and there. Maybe we are reordering a bullet. Maybe our third bullet is more relevant to this role than the current first bullet. Let's just reorder those bullets, right? So that the first thing that person sees is this bullet that is directly related to this role that I'm applying to. It hasn't been as important in previous roles, so it's always been third, but now I can just reorder the bullets a little bit. So use that research to dive into scoping out that resume and really translating that work. Obviously, highlight relevant experience, showcase your most relevant skills, experiences that match the job requirements. Customizing your statement, right? There's a lot of questions often about, should I use an objective statement? Should I have a summary at the top of my page? I lean less toward the objective statement because I find them to be very generic, often like applying to a role as financial analyst at XYZ company. Yes, correct. That's why you're giving me this resume. So you're not telling me much. And if you have a cover letter, same thing. I think you're kind of dealing with the objective in there, and in some cases just by putting in the resume, you're stating an objective. Sure. So I'm less in on the objective. I'm half in on the summary statement, I would say. A lot of folks use summary statements to highlight specific skills and examples of work that they've done. So, dedicated leader in the sustainability space with 15 years working across CPG companies, raising funds and meeting carbon standards, right? Maybe that is an opening summary. We think about our LinkedIn. If we have a well-developed LinkedIn, do I have a summary statement there that is kind of all-encompassing of everything that I do? Maybe I want to have that summary statement at the top, but customize it to yourself, right? Make it stand out, make it all-encompassing of the work. And then as I look at the other parts of your resume, the roles that you've held, the bullets that I'm reading, okay, it all starts to come together now. This is this big highlight, and I have supporting documentation there to show me these pieces that I'm talking about. And showcase relevant achievements, right? Quantify, showcase achievements that demonstrate your ability to excel. A lot of times we leave off, if we were promoted in a time frame that was abnormal to the company, if I jumped a step, if I was awarded or rated highly in my role, all things that could certainly be included. I don't know that I would put them as the first bullets under every role, but certainly something that I could highlight throughout and would certainly be okay to include in a resume. So showcasing those relevant achievements is certainly a piece. So again, doing this research to figure out what we want to highlight, to customize it all together, and make sure that we're showcasing these top pieces. All right, that's what we're kind of looking at here as we move through. We want to use action verbs and quantitative results. So we want to start with action verbs. A lot of times you'll see resumes that say responsible for. At the end of the day, I don't know that anybody truly cares if it starts with responsible for. Some people do, some people don't. But it's more powerful to start with an action verb and mix those up a little bit. Describe those experiences and accomplishments in that way. And we're going to talk in a minute about using a format called SAR, which is situation, action, result, as we think about our resume bullets. But definitely helps to start with that action verb. We want to quantify as much as we can, mentioning specific results, quantifiable achievements to show that impact. It can also show the scope, right? If I managed 500 people instead of 5 people, if I was working on a deal that was 5 million versus 500,000, it just gives me an idea of the scope of work that you've been doing. So do think about how you can quantify those examples. Not everything can be quantified, but anytime that we could show the number of employees, the percent of effectiveness that we've created, the increase in dollars, the increase in efficiency, all good things that we can include with numbers. And then we want to demonstrate success, right? How the actions that we took led to these measurable results that we are showing. Again, increased profitability, some efficiency, some customer satisfaction that we have created. And the way that we do this is by highlighting our transferable skills, right? Everybody has them. Sometimes we read jobs and I talk to people about jobs like, I could never get that job. And I haven't done anything similar, but I guarantee you that everyone on this call has transferable skills that would relate to any industry, any role. Does it mean that you are going to be the top candidate? No, because there's always going to be someone that has that directly relevant experience. But if I focus on these transferable skills and show someone that I did this in a different industry, a different function, a different environment, that could be a step ahead for me, right? So I would venture to guess everyone on here has analyzed and evaluated, has communicated effectively, has sold ideas, influenced decisions, hopefully has increased profits, collaborated cross-functionally, managed multiple tasks, problem solved, and thought creatively, right? Everybody on this call probably could at least say, if there's 7 things here, we could probably say that we've at least done 5 of these and could highlight those in our resume in one way or another. That even if we weren't directly related, direct industry, direct function, direct role, we could show that we've done something very similar in a different environment to say that we can do this. We've had that exposure, right? So do think about transferable skills. They are the fundamental business skills that can be used across multiple work contexts. So you may not feel like you have them right now today, but I promise you probably do. And so thinking about those ideas are a way to really make sure that you're highlighting things that will help you stand out, whether you think you perfectly knit. Again, I meet 3 of 7 bullets that they're saying I need for this job. Maybe I can fill another 2 with some transferable skills. All right, and again, we talked a little bit earlier about addressing our resume bullets in this way, accomplishment statements. We want to use a SAR format. You may have heard of this before. And then we're going to set up with a situation, an action, and a result, right? So the situation being, I was doing this, I took this action, which resulted in this piece. And we want to quantify those things as best we can. I have a couple of examples coming up. But your accomplishment bullet, opportunity to articulate your value, sell yourself to the employer, and differentiate yourself from other candidates. We want to use these bullets that highlight tangible, measurable results that reflect the size and scope. And we want to provide detail on successes rather than tasks. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I find at the level of folks that we're probably talking about. And hopefully, if you are a more recent student, you have really worked on this because we were working on it with you. If you are an alum with more season to you, hopefully we can take a look. And we want to get away from that taskiness of a resume, right? A lot of times I read a resume and it probably, if I got the job description, I could probably say like, these are the 4 bullets that they just copied and pasted from that job description over into the resume. But let's really focus again more on this SAR format, these tangible ideas, this measurable success that we can do. Some examples to think about as you're thinking about your experience: manage teams, departments, projects, save money for your department or your company, achieve greater results with limited or fewer resources, right? Receive special recognition, awards, letters of recommendation, commendation, or you implemented new systems, processes, procedures. And where are those being used, right? Like sometimes someone says, I developed a new training program that is used in my company. And I'll ask, well, how many offices is it? Oh, it's used in 25 offices across 10 different countries. Like, make sure we're including that. That's a huge difference than just, hey, I created this training system for my company. But it's, to say that it's now being used and maybe it's been translated to different languages, it's been adjusted to different learning styles, all huge pieces that we can include on this resume that we want to make sure are getting across. All right, so here's an example of how we want to take these accomplishment bullets, accomplishment stories on a resume and break them out. So maybe I had a bullet that said, perform due diligence to select group to manage budget and create a healthcare platform, right? If we take this SAR system into mindset, we might end up at a point where we ask some questions and we get down to perform due diligence on technology companies as part of a multi-year product strategy development, selecting groups to manage a 15 million annual budget and create industry-leading healthcare platform, right? That's a much more impressive resume bullet because I've added that I was doing due diligence on technology companies. It was part of a multi-year product strategy, that it was a 15 million budget, and it was for an industry-leading platform, right? So we want to just build out a little bit further than some of these basic things. One other example I have: developed a promotional strategy and plan across retailers to generate additional profit for major CPG. And then we changed that up. We asked some questions. We got into develop a promotional optimization strategy and implementation plan across 5 major retailers in the Netherlands to generate $1 million additional system profit for a major UK-based CPG company, right? Again, I get a general sense from that first bullet, but the second way, I'm getting into specifics, right? I have a specific experience with optimization strategy and implementation. I was working with multiple retailers, specifically in Europe, and we generated additional profit for a UK-based company, right? That shows me far more scope than maybe that first bullet does. So think about that. And there's a lot of questions. We're going to do a session on AI in the job search. I think in December is when that's coming up. But I thought to throw this in as well because AI has a strong part of our career search these days. So how can AI help us with our resume bullets? And I did an example here that you can see. I typed into, this was Google Bard in this case, but how could I improve the resume bullet responsible for due diligence to select group to manage and create a healthcare platform? And it gave me some simple tips. But also in addition, in the red, you can see it gave me two different ways that I could approach this. The first being selected and evaluated a group of developers to manage and create a new healthcare platform, following a thorough due diligence process that included reviewing proposals, interviewing key personnel, and assessing technical capabilities. The second bullet was if you wanted to focus more on specific parts of healthcare, that it was a mental health platform. But AI can be an assistant in this. I'm not a proponent, again, of using AI to solely build out your resume. But if you're getting stuck with different ideas, a very simple thing you can do is to put your bullet in and ask AI how to improve this bullet. Again, much larger session coming in December. If you visit our website, there is a video from one of our partners at Breaking Into Tech talking about all the different ways that you can use AI in job search. But this was a very simple one that if you are stuck, it's a good way to get the creative juices flowing. There are far more things you could do. You could put the job description in and say, write me some resume bullets for this type of role, and it'll give you very generic bullets that you could then adapt your experience to. And that's the piece that I want you to think about if you use AI, is adapting your experience to what you're seeing, right? But AI is a great tool, can certainly help with the resume and build it out. Far more information coming on that as we progress through. Let's jump into a little bit of format here. I'm a fan of a template. I like templates. I like things that are straightforward and readable and easy that I can look at very quickly. There are a lot of great versions out there. This is the resume template that we use at SOM. It is in our alumni resume guide. You can pull it out if you're looking for something that is a little bit more simplistic and gives me a straightforward view of experience. Again, summary statement, if you want to use it, that's where you would put it. Sometimes, again, those fancy formats do confuse automated systems, so be careful about using those. This might be a better format to use for an applicant tracking system. If you are an alum, and especially a recent alum, if you were a recent student, we probably had your education at the top. Let's push that education down to the bottom now and highlight your most recent working experience. So your experience should come first. There's our note about 1 page for every 10 years of work experience. Again, you do what you want to do. This is advice that's coming in from others. We want to think about relevant experience versus professional, just listing our professional history, right? This gets back to this tailored idea. Do we need to list every job that we've ever done? We could probably skip some here and there, right? Like when we apply to the company, we want to include all those jobs in their system for background check purposes. But maybe on the resume, we can create a gap idea that we can explain, or we can find a more creative way to skip over some things to just highlight a certain aspect. Maybe we put specific client experience, maybe we put specific industry experience, and then we have an other jobs section. There's a lot of different ways that we can work with that. And again, using the SAR format is the best way to go. But granted, I'm part of creating this, but I like a simple version like this that we're looking at right now that really lists out. There are some versions, if you haven't done this in a while, there's certainly some templates in Microsoft Word that are okay. They're not great. I would probably lean toward something along this line that you can just kind of type into and move forward with. All right, top performing resumes have simple layouts and plenty of white space, just like this slide, right? The easier you make it to read, the more opportunity someone will take to read it, right? A lot of times, I've even done this in my life, right? I'm down to like 1/2-inch margins all around. I've got tons of stuff crammed on there because I wanted it to be 2 pages, but I didn't have enough. So I made it 10-point font and got as much. That's not the way to go. Again, if you're getting to that point, get some feedback from different people. What is useful? What's not? Instances I can give you. Sometimes people have things on their resumes from undergrad, and we haven't been in undergrad in 15, 20 years at this point. Okay to keep, if I'm a more recent alum, sure, keep the stuff under Yale SOM, but the undergrad stuff, even if it's directly related, is probably a long time ago. A lot of times people list a ton of volunteer experience, and I'll ask them the last time that they did that or worked with that organization. It's 5, 7 years ago, not relevant anymore. It's just something we're trying to show. So again, thinking about how we can use this white space to make sure a reader and cut things out that maybe aren't as relevant these days. All right, so as we wrap up here and jump into questions, some things to think about. One, the resume reader should gain an understanding of reading our resume, what we've accomplished, how we will help this company in the future, whether you as the applier have the right experience, if you are a good fit for the corporate culture, and if you can be an effective leader. right? How can we set up our resumes to show these things? And again, our resume is one piece of this, right? We have informational interviews and coffee chats. We have cover letters to round about and bring together all of this stuff that we're working on. But when you look at your resume, when you look at others, are these questions that are being answered as you look at it? Or are you just kind of serving up something that is good enough? And we're going to hope that someone will find something on that resume that makes sense to them, as opposed to presenting something on that resume that makes sense to them. So think about that as you look. You can always make appointments with the coaches here, the alumni coaches, to have a resume review. If you need resources, you can visit the CDO website on the attached to the alumni page. And you'll see that if you scroll down under build your brand, resume, cover letter, and story, go down to resources and check off resume. There are tons of resources there: action verb lists, samples, the resume guide for working professionals, accomplishment statement examples to help you work through all of those things. All right, so I'm going to dive into some questions now, if that works. I think there are a couple that are loading up here. I think we talked about the multiple page question. I've heard people say not to include jobs more than 15 years old. You're at risk of age discrimination. What's my take? Again, I'm going to go back to the piece. Like, it depends. Like, if you've only had 2 jobs in the last 15 years, people that, I would say folks in, I'm going to use my generation here, we tend to stay in our jobs longer than I think students or alums of maybe the last 5 to 7 years are, right? People are changing jobs every 2 years now. So over 15 years, you might have 7 different jobs in there. And that feels like a lot. But if I've been in a similar role, or I've been in maybe just 2 roles over the last 10 or 15 years, then I think it's okay to add. But it's an individual decision. I think, again, if you're just putting it on there to put it on there, then it doesn't make sense. If you are putting it on there because there's relevant experience from that role 10 years ago or 15 years ago that is directly related to what I'm trying to do, then sure, go ahead. But what are we sacrificing to add that on there? Or what's the best way to make sure that we're presenting that information in a way that someone's going to read it? Okay. There was a question: when I bring the 2-page resume, will that person look at it during the meeting or put it aside for later? I'm going to put that back in the idea of I can't control what that person does with it. All I can control is bringing that kind of larger version and putting it in front of them. Maybe they scan it, maybe they put it aside, maybe it's something they look at later, maybe it's something they give to HR. The part that I can control is just kind of presenting, hey, here's a more expanded version of the experience that I think I bring to the table here, if you want to take a look at it. Okay. Let's see. Someone asked, when you mention adding activities which are potentially eye-catching, okay, would you include something alternative like being a professional astrologer, especially if you're, yeah, absolutely. I think, that interest line is something that I could say, like, the first thing I'll say to someone, if you have some other interesting things based on work experience, we'll take it off. But if you're looking for that conversation starter, something different, certainly adding, maybe you're a personal investor, maybe that you are a professional astrologer. In this case, even if your main function is something different, it doesn't hurt, right? It's a hobby. It shows that you're human, that you have different interests, that you're not robotic. And I tend to like, again, this is me. This is what I can control. I like to hire the human. I like to look at, the fit and what the cultural fit of this person is. This is someone that I want to work with. And sometimes those additional pieces are something that give me a better reflection of that than the person that can deliver. Now, my job is not related to making money. I could probably relate it, but at the end of the day, my direct role is not to make money. So if you're, in sales, if you're in a business development role where truly delivering profit is a thing, then we might have a different conversation about that, or what we would want to highlight. But it kind of depends on the role in some cases. And I understand that I am looking to hire the more human aspect of employees. So that's just a way to kind of think about that piece. But I would always say it would be okay to list, 2 or 3 things. They're conversation starters. It's something specific, right? Like, I have a very specific golf handicap that would get someone to go, oh, wow. Or I visited a number of countries based on professional and personal travel that would make someone go, oh, wow. I've surfed XYZ wave. I study this as a part-time thing. I'm interested in, I follow a specific genre of book, or cooking or sports that maybe generates a conversation, right? There are a lot of weird reasons why people get themselves in front of others. Everything down to my name was similar to that person, to you're a fan of a same team that I'm a fan of, to I'm really interested to just ask you questions about how you manage to be a professional astrologer on the side of your healthcare job, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do it. So I think you judge it, and hopefully you have some conversation. You get a sense of what the culture in those organizations like, and then that could be a way that could sort of help you identify if that's something that works really well. All right. Interesting note, just a note here. Somebody said, I rarely read a resume if it doesn't have a cover letter attached. Something good advice for folks that don't like writing cover letters, which I think is probably everyone. So someone wrote the question here about a moment ago, you mentioned it's good to translate a job title to a more understandable for recruiters. Do you feel there could be issues with background check because of that? I would say, I'm talking specifically about the resume here. And I would always probably put it in parentheses next to the actual job title. So if my job title was, supply chain commander, and I just want to put project manager next to it, I would do that on the resume. When I actually apply to the position in the company's website, I would use that official title in those cases. So good fact check there, Lulu. Thank you. But yes, definitely when you're applying to the actual role, I would use the direct. If you're reaching out more for like conversation and things, and you want to make a translation to a role, then it's okay to kind of put, again, in parentheses next to that title, a different idea. How does one step away from career to whatever the reason, take care of family, just taking a break and looking to return? How do you note that break? I see it done a lot of different ways. I've seen people literally put on there just, family break. Some people just don't acknowledge it. They leave the gap and wait for questions. They use their cover letter to explain that piece and leave it off from the resume. So I think there's a lot of different kind of ways that people address a gap on the resume. Those are a couple that I could think of. But again, whether you want someone to discover it, and therefore we just kind of leave the gap as it is and we show our last job, or we want to just get ahead of it and say, took a family parental leave, X date to X date, and just have it there, that's fine too. I've seen people do that. Again, I think I'm going to go back to this networking piece and this informational piece, right? If we know more about the culture of the organization we're applying to, we'll probably get a better sense of what they might be open to seeing in front of them as opposed to discovering. So that would be something that I would say on that. What does SAR stand for? SAR stands for situation, action, result. Sometimes you'll see it as STAR, situation or task, action and result. And that's how we want to, again, address our resume bullets, but also as we think about our interview questions, as we're answering interview questions, we want to establish our interview answers, our 2-minute answers, maybe to an interview question, also in that SAR or STAR format. So think about that. Question about, is 3 bullets the recommended number of highlights? I think it depends. 3 is a good start. I think if it's a role that is more recent, you might have more. If it's a role that is a little more in the past, I typically go to 2 or 3 is probably the relevant. I would probably stay away from just 1 bullet, unless, again, it's a really significant bullet that you wanted to mention. I don't know that there is an exact number of bullets. We want to, again, highlight the things that we think are most related to that job. 3 is a good start, but I've seen 5. I've seen 7. Do I think 7's a great idea? Not really. But I think 3 to 5 is probably the landing spot where I would see most pieces landing. Okay. What are my thoughts on the LinkedIn profiles? I have a lot of thoughts on LinkedIn profiles versus resume. I think the LinkedIn profile is a great backup to the resume, right? Like I have more freedom to, the resume has kind of, it comes with an idea, it comes with a template, it comes with what we need to be doing. And there's a format that people know. LinkedIn gives you more opportunity to really expand on different pieces of that resume. So maybe like something that is just 1 bullet on my resume could be, 2 or 3 paragraphs in LinkedIn if you really wanted to break it out further. So I'm not a big fan, I guess, of the copying of my resume right into LinkedIn, because I think for those reasons, it gives you the opportunity to expand a little bit more in LinkedIn on specific projects or experiences that maybe you don't have the room to do on your resume. How can alumni access CDO resources? Our webpage that I just showed there is open to the public. If you navigate yourself to the SOM website and click on the career section, you will find yourself right on our website. And there's a ton of resources and accessibility, and you have the opportunity to make coaching appointments just like you did with students. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just looking through to see. Good question on font types. I tend to stick with the Times New Roman or Arial world. I think that's probably, the question here too is about ATS systems. Yeah, I would tend to stick in those because I think that's what is most readable by those systems. Again, the more complicated formatting you create in terms of margins and lines and highlighting and colors and things like that, the harder it is for the ATS system to get to. But I'm also going to follow this up again with, I don't want you applying to ATS systems. I want you reaching out to former classmates. I want you to network. I want you to do the informational interviews so that your application is you connecting with someone and they're saying, oh, just make sure you fill out the application on our website. They're not doing that to find you. They're doing that because they know you're already there and you need to go through the formal piece. But yes, I would agree. I'd stick to, I wouldn't go lower than 10-point font. I wouldn't go higher than 12-point font. I'd probably stay in the Times New Roman world. Arial could be something that you could use. I'd use bold, highlight, underline to accentuate the pieces that we want to accentuate. I think I've got room for one more question here. There's a question here for those that have been laid off recently. How do people note that on their resume, corporate layoff? I don't know that it's something that a lot of people probably put on their resume per se. I think you would highlight that experience. I think it's something that would, I guess, more commonly be relayed in potentially the cover letter, but more in a face-to-face conversation, again, with the hopes that you are networking your way into those companies. But yeah, I mean, if you're simply applying to roles and you've been laid off recently, I'm not sure that is something I don't believe it is something that you necessarily have to note on the resume itself. I think it's, again, something that could be discovered through conversation or another opportunity. All right. My favorite question. Okay, the last question here that I have time for here. How can I summarize a 30-plus page CV with 20 years in academic medicine? That is hard. I've done this before. I've worked with some students. I would say the best way to do that is to have someone take a look. And it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to transition from academic medicine into a more corporate type role, there's a lot there that recruiters, I'm going to just be very, very blunt, they're not going to care about. So we really want to dive into, like, yes, if you got funding, you did some grant writing and you got funding for a new medical assessment or device, let's dive in on the strategy, the finance of that, why we did it, and we can get rid of a lot of the presentation and the writing and things like that. If that is your case, where you've got a really long resume, you haven't looked at it in a long time, I would say a coaching appointment is probably the best way to dive into that to be successful. All right, I am out of time today. It's 1 o'clock. I appreciate everyone's time. If you do have further questions, feel free to reach out. Our email address is som.cdo@yale.edu. You can also go into CMS, which is our platform, if you have access to schedule time with one of our coaches. And we do this on a monthly basis. So I hope to see you all again in the future. Thanks a lot and have a great day.